One. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the fourth day of the FICCI E-Frames 2020. We've had a small break before this, and welcome to the last session. The session is called The New Paradigm of Producing Animation Opportunities for Indian Animation. We have a heavy-packed panel moderated by Mr. Munjal Shroff, Director and Chief Operating Officer of Graphiti Studio. Mr. Shroff, the platform is all yours.
All right. Thank you so much. Good evening, friends, and thank you so much for joining us today for this really power-packed session on the new paradigm for animation production and opportunities that are now coming up for Indian animation. So we have an amazing lineup of speakers today. Let me quickly introduce them. We have Heather Kenyon. Hi, Heather. She's Senior Development and Production, Citizen Skull Productions, and ex-Senior Director of Development Original Series, Cartoon Network US. We have Aram Yacobian, Director, Kids and Family, International Originals Country Netflix. Hello, Aram. And we have Silas Hickey, founding member of Custom Nuts Animation and ex-regional head of Animation Development and Original Development of Cartoon Network, APAC. So, all the three panelists that we have today have phenomenal experience in producing some seriously good content and super talented at what they do. And I've been very fortunate to work with all three of them. And it's been really an enriching experience. So thank you so much for accepting the invitation and joining us. I know it's odd hours for most of you. I mean, Silas, it's 12 a.m. And I'm keeping
this is coffee. That was just saying this is coffee, not booze. Yeah.
All right, let's get started. Heather, I'm going to start with you. Just to kind of kick this off. What are the changes that you see in the animation space over the last 5 years? Obviously OTT being one of them, but overall, you had a lot of experience. So can you just kind of share that?
Well, I mean, overall, there's just been an explosion of places to pitch. And also, it's really opened up for the different types of content. I mean, to go back just a little bit, if you think, it's a bit unsettled right now because we're kind of in the middle of this massive shift from a cable paradigm to the streaming paradigm. If you think when I was a kid, it was Saturday morning and all kids' content was just these three tiny blocks, on three tiny channels, Of course, their market share was huge because there were only three. And it was a huge, unsettling, crazy time when cable came in and we all, shifted to that platform. But it opened up a lot of new possibilities with, three different 24-hour networks. So it was a lot more content and a lot more variation. And now it's kind of that shift again, but hyperdrive as we go from that cable model to the streaming model. So there's just so many more places to pitch and so many more different types of animation that have a home that didn't previously have a home. Right. So I find that, for a while it was really very much a co-production model, and we might be going back a bit more to those like big homes that you can pitch that will more take and own a property and push it out globally across these new streaming platforms. Not saying the co-production model's going to go away at all, but I just find there's a lot more opportunity domestically in the United States with these new big homes. But saying that, it's still a little, a lot of these platforms have just come online or just growing or just beginning to hire their people. Netflix is the grandpa in this area now. When they, were the kids a couple years ago that really began to shake up the market. So, the biggest changes in the past 5 years, explosion of content, a lot more content being greenlit and driven forward a lot faster, be it your first season or your third season, from the streamers to the cable networks. Everybody wants more content faster just to keep competing with each other in this new marketplace.
Right. And I think also this also puts pressure on producing content faster, right? Doesn't it? because everyone watched more. I mean, with the whole binge watching kind of the behavior that we see, once people want, they want all of it. I think there was a time where, you were premiering shows maybe by season or every week. I remember when we did a show with Nick, we used to put out 2 episodes every weekend, and that was fine. But I think those days are gone.
Yeah, if you have a hit, those networks are going to want that second season and that third season a lot faster. That happened with a client of mine. They were like, okay, no more lags, just straight into second season.
Right. All right. So, how do you see, the last 5 years? Obviously, you guys came to India, and that's been very exciting. But even globally, I mean, you guys are the pioneers in the OTT space. So, it'd be interesting to see your take on how the last 5 years have been.
Yeah, some of the biggest shifts that we've kind of noticed over the last few years as OTT and streaming have entered the marketplace in a meaningful way have been, one big one has been formats, right? So when programming for broadcast, for cable, for TV, it's, you've had a traditional model of 26 or 52 episode orders, or in India, in many cases, 104 episode orders, really kind of big orders of traditional formats of 11 minute episodes or 22-minute episodes, to really kind of help program the broadcasting slots that have existed on linear TV. And obviously with streaming and on-demand watching, that's no longer important. You can create a format that is really best to fit the story, that is the best kind of medium to convey the message, to convey the comedy, to convey the narrative, and not being really kind of stuck to a traditional kind of a linear format in storytelling. And so there's been a lot of shift, I think, in how content is produced and how stories can be told in the kids and family space. And I think it's also then empowers kind of a new set of stories that can come to the market that don't necessarily fit those traditional formats. So that's been an exciting shift, because it really, folks come in to me and say, what format are you looking for? And really the first response back to them is well, what's the format that's best to tell the story that you are working to tell, or that you're passionate about telling. So I think that is one kind of big shift. That's been a really exciting one, because it's creative driven more so than anything else. Another shift is many of the streaming platforms, obviously Netflix is global, many of the streaming platforms are increasingly global. And so when a piece of animated content launches on a global streaming platform, it's launching in 190 countries on the same day in many languages. Whereas traditionally it was often sold to channel kind of region by region or country by country. And so you immediately have the opportunity to speak to a global audience, which creates an opportunity to tell kind of bigger, more universal stories. And that's been an exciting one. And again, as Heather was alluding to, has created an incredible opportunity to tell many different types of stories that represent the different audiences that you are now speaking to all over the world. And kind of connected to that point, the last shift is really a leaning into kind of the commitment to ensure audiences all around the world of different backgrounds can really see themselves in the content that they're watching, and that there's great diversity and representation in the types of characters that are on screen, and the types of stories, and the types of creators that we're working with. So it really has been an exciting shift, I think, for those reasons, and of course many more, and one that we continue to evolve, but I think with more diversity and with more kind of creative-led story and decisions, there's a lot of exciting growth happening and ahead for animation.
Yeah, it's pretty, I mean, it's really interesting what you say about the shift and how that's affected kind of, or informed creative decisions in terms of making shows. Like Munjal, when we started working together, like Snaptoons all those years ago with the shorts program there, it was sort of unheard of to, for the kids comedy space, which is what I was working in mainly at the time. It's that was all episodic a lot of slapstick, episodic kind of stuff, and anything serialized was just kind of unheard of. And now it's kind of like, I mean, it went from this sort of action adventure comedy kind of thing to then really short form, bite-sized kind of stuff that could travel easily around the APAC region, and you didn't have to, there wasn't cliffhangers, it wasn't serialized or anything, and now it's kind of gone now that is an option. I mean, it's swung the opposite direction for a while, but now that's one of many options because of all of these different sort of, there's lots of different formats that you can use, as you correctly point out, I think, to best tell the story, that best suits the story, rather than forcing it into a certain format that just suits, as one or two different sort of distribution conduits, right? So, yeah.
And it makes it, sorry, Munjal, but I was just going to say, it makes it a bit challenging, because it used to be, creators would come to you with a show and they'd be like, can we sell this? What do you think? And you'd be able to look at it immediately and be like, that's a Disney show, that's a Nick show, that's a CN show. And you can't anymore. People come to you and they're like, what about this? It's, something that's so out of the box, and you have to really pause and say, I don't know, let me ask around about this, so it's really cool from that standpoint, that you get to work on things that you never thought that you would be able to.
Yeah, like a serialized Roadrunner. That's what I wanted to have a go at. Like serialized short form slapstick.
But
with actual cliffhangers, no pun intended.
One of the things is that, while obviously now we are seeing binge watching that's happening, but even today, a bulk of the production is still, particularly in the kids space, 11-minute episodes, So, and I think we are kind of still staying with that, So I think the question is, do we, at least, on the OTT platforms, do we see longer content, or maybe half-an-hour episodes, like we are seeing that in live action for sure. Like we have 60-minute, 55, 60-minute episodes, and which is fine. And that's because they're all serialized content, But do you see that as a trend in kids? To tell a long form story over spanning multiple episodes?
Me?
Yeah, Silas, you can have a go at it, and I would definitely want to have Aram's views on that.
Yeah.
Aram?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing it on our side in the animation space, and I think you'll continue to see more of it. I think some examples have been, we've launched series where the first episode was like around 60 minutes, and then episode 2 and on were about 30 minutes. We've launched Troll Hunters from Guillermo del Toro and DreamWorks Animation. That's like a highly serialized, really like it feels like a big long movie. We're working on a kind of big event series with Jorge Gutierrez about really Mesoamerican mythology that again kind of is highly serialized, big epic story, strong character narrative at the core of it. So we've certainly on our service have seen a number of content that have kind of pushed the boundaries of format and the types of stories that we're telling, and we'll continue to see more. And then on the other side of it, we've also done shows that are 5-minute slapstick, 4-minute kind of slapstick, nonverbal, very comedic kind of short episodes. And I think that's what's great about the streaming world, is it's not kind of one size fits all, right? When we're working on kind of a very rich narrative story that feels like a big feature, we have the ability to kind of work with a format that allows us to tell that story in a way that really kind of delivers on the opportunity. But then on the flip side, there's also the ability to then really kind of play with shorter format content that is best fit for those types of stories. So we're really kind of seeing the range, and I think as creators feel more and more comfortable kind of experimenting and telling their stories in these spaces, we'll be seeing a lot more.
Right. Silas, you were in Hong Kong, and before that you were in Tokyo for a very long time with Cartoon Network Japan. So from Japan to Cartoon Network Hong Kong, and now back in Japan, and obviously you've kind of been looking at the Japanese industry after a while, and now we're already based in Japan. So how do you see the the transition or the change in Japan, in terms of the content that is being produced today? How do you see how has that evolved? Because anime, like I always think that anime is like a whole different planet in a different universe, because the way it's evolved and the way it's, come about, it's really, really stunning.
Yeah, and the way it's made too. I mean, in the United, well, I mean, in terms of, I'm doing a lot of work in non-dialogue slapstick kind of stuff, minimal dialogue slapstick, and the way that the golden age of that type of animation is very volumetric. It's very it uses Cartesian geometry and perspective and all this kind of stuff, whereas anime is really flat and much more of a focus on character design. So it's like, these two completely sort of different worlds, and that's really interesting, because what I'm for what I'm trying to do anyway, which is trying to kind of broach these two things with direct collaboration into a show, rather than just making more traditional sort of anime stuff. And I think Netflix has done a great job with Beastars. We were talking about that before. So that is a confluence of, I think, two really interesting styles that equals more than the sum of its parts. Because look, here's the thing. Here's what I've noticed since I've been away in Hong Kong for all that time. Not a whole lot's changed in terms of, sure, there's a boom in anime, especially all the skewing stuff overseas, but it's almost like the studios here, at least the ones that I hang out with, are still kind of making content for the domestic market, and internationally is just a really welcome, fantastic sort of side effect, right? So this is and this is why I'm trying to sort of do something a bit outside of the box in terms of the comedy kid space here, because this is a real problem for people working in that space, because you've got a declining population, right? So there's less kids every year. And compounding that problem is the fact that a lot of the stuff is really, you've got your Doraemons and stuff like that are doing really well in India and elsewhere, but they're not huge hits overseas in terms of, like in mainly in terms of licensing and merchandising and stuff, I think. But there's not enough of those kind of shows anyway. So compounding that problem, you've got a lot of slice of life kind of shows that don't export that well. So I think that what needs to happen is, and it just needs to be a lot more sort of generic diversity in the kids space here for it to be able to, so that creators and individual creators, small and large studios, can have some skin in the game in shows like, I don't know, contemporized Tom and Jerry that can work elsewhere in the world, as opposed to, or Lamput, an Indian show like Lamput or something like that. Or a co-pod between India and Japan on a show like, an Indie May, as I said before. Let's make an Indie May with, with that kind of slapstick mechanics in Tom and Jerry, but that's exportable to the US or exportable to Europe or something like that, rather than just there's a whole bunch of my friends who are just acquiescing to this eventual decline and end of this kind of kid space in the Japanese anime production space, where everything else is booming and going gangbusters, right? So and again, a lot of the more interesting stuff's being done by companies like Netflix and perhaps Crunchyroll and stuff like that. So nothing much has changed, but there's definitely some interesting stuff happening internationally, which is sort of a side effect to a lot of the industry here, I think.
All right.
How's that answer?
Awesome. So, the other thing that's now on us is, and the reason we're all holed up in our homes, is COVID, And there is one silver lining, I think, for our industry, is that there's going to be an increased focus on animation and VFX around the world, and people are realizing that probably you can't go outside and shoot. You'll probably do a lot of chroma shoots, which will hopefully, push up, more work for the VFX guys, also looking at maybe more animated content, Aaron, what do you think? Are you seeing that? Is there a strategic shift that you are seeing when you're commissioning content, and how are you dealing with the whole COVID situation?
I think, Munjal, you said it exactly right. In animation, we've been kind of lucky in these trying times that we've been able to kind of continue. Of course, there was a bit of a shift kind of early on to make sure that everybody, either folks that we're working with directly or partner studios that we're working with, were able to kind of shift artists and their machines and their tools into homes, so folks can continue to do the great work that they're doing remotely. And it's been incredible in the community of folks that we're working with, how kind of rapidly and seamlessly that shift has happened. It kind of speaks to the testament of the of kind of like that, the strong will and resilience of animators. And of course, this making a animated series or animated film is no easy or quick feat. So I think that the training and the skin thickening that we've had kind of over the years in animation production has prepared us well for such a shift. So it's been incredible to kind of see that. And I think because of that, we've been able to continue progress on the projects that we're working with. Of course, projects in early development at the writing stage, at the concept building stage, storyboarding stage, that happens very seamlessly from home anyway. So that kind of continues. But even pre-production and production, with folks being able to move home and move remotely, has continued to be smooth, all things considered. And I think what that's unlocked is, of course, around the world, you have many animators that would commute to cities that were not necessarily their home to spend time at studios. And those folks being able to kind of return home that might be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours away from where they work, and to be able to continue to maintain that productivity, I think is opening a lot of eyes of what does this look like, even in kind of the post-COVID world of, are there efficiencies to be able to kind of work remotely and to be able to then access talent in ways that we haven't leaned into historically because of kind of the need and the feeling of everybody has to be housed in that roof. But for example, within India, the talent in the artist and animation community, and being in such a country is really kind of all over the country. And to be able for a single studio to access all of that talent as part of a single kind of pipeline and create tools and processes that can help kind of supervise and give feedback and continue to maintain those efficiencies, I think is going to unlock a lot of benefit in the future. And even beyond just India, animation production is such a global business, right? Like long history of co-productions, long history of folks in different countries and different parts of the world kind of working together. And this is really kind of perpetuated and I think sped up that cycle of how we can set up a working process where you can kind of lean into that. So I think in short, we've been able to luckily, and again, I think really due to the resilience and the innovation of the great animation community, have been able to kind of continue the animation projects that we're working on around the world and are really now realizing or further realizing really great efficiencies that can exist in kind of working a little bit more remotely that I think will have long-term benefits.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for us, when we were producing Krishish Baltiboy and Yom, the series, when both of our art with you were on Netflix. But just so you know that, we started doing this almost about 2-3 years back, where we worked with about 40 different teams across India, and it was, what I realized is that a lot of the people who come to Mumbai, which is where we are based, is because they don't have a choice, and I think now what's happening is that earlier, we were mainly looking at pre-production, or post, where we used to do that. But slowly, what we are also seeing is that there are a lot of studios which are set up in small towns, right? And with the increase in the bandwidth, and the 4G coming in, and now accessible even in smaller towns, we are able to farm out work, get work, But I think it will also put pressure on, I think, better managerial skills. How do you manage and line produce these shows really, really efficiently? I think that's one of the strengths that we've had, that we've been in the space for 25 years, and I think that's going to be a differentiator, that how do you also manage production efficiently, and I think, so I feel that entire kind of talent of, just kind of managing production, without really worrying about the creative aspect, but being like literally like a assembly line, that how are you managing that aspect? I think that's going to be very, very vital.
And I think as new businesses are built or they grow, is maintaining and establishing kind of a studio culture. If more folks are working kind of remotely, because of course I think that's something that we find really important is folks, especially it's such a creative business, and really kind of buying into the projects and the vision of the studio, and being able to, what is a studio culture in a world where many folks kind of work remotely, and you're onboarding new kind of artists. I think there'll be really interesting kind of developments and a skill set built in that space as well.
Yeah, the heavy lifting part is going to be really interesting to see how that works. I mean, but at the kind of, conceptual development stage, it's so different working remotely on that. I mean, it's really beneficial to, especially like story breaking and stuff like that. You got to kind of have people in a room, preferably in like, on a beach in Tahiti or something. But, you want those crew to be together. And I think, if look in a COVID-free world, you can perhaps just have those meetings up front and then at key creative checkpoints. So I don't think anyone's going to be flying as much as they were. It was ridiculous, So maybe do that for that. I don't know, but the heavy lifting part, that's a real conundrum, because how do you do that without everyone under one roof? Right?
Yeah. I think that's the serious challenge, which is basically when you have individual artists doing their shots and then coming in and then being able to review all of that, or briefing the animation team. I think those are things, and then kind of tracking it on a day-to-day basis. I think that's where the real expertise lies, like when we were doing Krishnish Balti Boy series, we used to break up the animation, in sequences, and then give it out to studios, and then, have them back and give them feedback shot by shot basis, And it is about, if one has to do this, I think it's about getting down to that nitty-gritty of managing talent in that fashion. It's different. I mean, most people are not used to. We're all used to having 100 people, 200 people, 500 people under one roof. And I think that is definitely changing. And I think probably one will see some of that large teams dissipate, and potentially smaller teams coming. Heather, I just wanted to bring you in. And I know you have a certain point of view on, how being in physically different spaces is always not the best scenario for creatives to work together. So let's hear you.
Yeah. Well, just going back to what Silas was saying, I think it's going to change how much we travel. Like, the third week of March, I was flying to New York for one meeting. Like, now that's just ridiculous. Like, we would never do that now. It's like, I'm not flying all that way and taking all that time. So I think our general, how much we all travel, and it's crazy making. I think we've realized we can get the same thing done like this without taking that many days off our schedule. But the last trip I did take was the launch of a show, was I went to French Canada, Quebec City, and was with the whole team as we, stayed together for a week and went through the first storyboards and went through the first stories. And, and I think that's those kind of show launches and show kickoffs. I think that's where that team building is so important, to be together. Even, if you're just all going to lunch together or all grabbing a drink together, that's where the real gelling of a team kind of happens. So I think that's still really hard to get over a Zoom. So I think even if you are doing everything remotely to get the work done, absolutely, you can do that. But I think the management on, I know you're talking a very tough physical, production management, but I also think on a soft people skill management side, the managers of shows are going to have to be really like, okay, we haven't done anything for 6 months or a year. Like, how are we going to get everyone together in that team spirit kind of back? And the other just very funny thing in these COVID times, that's great for people in developing projects all over should know, is that, celebrities, big names, they didn't used to care about animation, not necessarily, and now you can call the agencies and you're like, hey, would so-and-so read this? And they're like, absolutely, and I have a primetime show that a company's interested in. I need to get that big name showrunner on for to go back. And before people weren't very interested in reading my primetime animated thing. Now every single company, we'd be overjoyed. So I think the physical limitations of live action have opened up some very interesting doors into different showrunners and those names that now, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit later, but the names that you kind of need now to grab onto your shows to make enough noise to get attention.
Yeah, some of my friends at Warner Brothers were saying that there's so many live action people asking for animated versions of,
people that never used to care about animation are suddenly like, I'm the biggest animation fan. And you're like,
I reckon they should animate the Tokyo Olympics. Would be a good idea. I think that's that.
I'll share something with you very interesting. So we are working right now on a project, right, where we've been very keen on getting some of the Bollywood actors to come and lend voices, right? And potentially it's always been a challenge because, some of these people are just so close to that, And it's really interesting in the last 2 months, when we're working on an animated feature, and which at least we are looking at some really, really top Bollywood actors. And I think that whole tone has changed dramatically, and it's refreshing, It was hard to get a meeting. It was hard. Now they're saying, why do you send us the script? We'll go through it and then maybe we can meet, maybe we can do a Zoom call. Obviously you can't meet. But I think that a lot of people are realizing that, particularly a lot of the actors are realizing that, hey, I can get into a voice booth and I can still do my thing, and, I can still do an animated movie without really risking myself, So I think that change in mindset is definitely come.
But and I think it's COVID, but I also think that it's this diversity of programming that we've been talking about. Like, I think that if people haven't been tuning into kids' content for a while, and now they suddenly are, they're like, oh my God, like, this is really awesome stuff. Like, this is stuff that I can get something out of even, because some of the stories are so intricate and, not just for kids. So I think it's also just, we've stepped up our game. And so if people haven't been paying attention and they're suddenly paying attention, it's like, it's where the cool kids are doing some cool stuff. So don't you want to join?
Yeah.
I think as animators, we were always cool. I think it's just that the world has started taking notice now.
Exactly.
All right. So, the other thing I want to talk to you about is, I think Netflix has one of the widest choice in animation, kids and family, adult animation, anime, why is, and I see that particularly with Netflix, why is animation so important for a streaming service like Netflix? Why, and how are you programming for that kind of content? Because I believe you probably have the best and the biggest library of animation, I think, among all the OTT players.
Thank you. I'd say just to, as you said, Munjal, we have a few different kind of divisions or areas of focus in animation. We have a really great anime team who's based in Tokyo that's making anime out of Japan, but as well as kind of anime adjacent content that really speaks to the anime audience all over the world, from based on kind of IP from different parts of the world. We have an adult animation team that's based in Los Angeles with a great executive in the UK as well, which is seeking projects from outside of the United States, that's working on adult animation, kind of primarily comedies, and that's kind of a space that many of us in the animation community really, really love. And then we have our division, which is kind of the kids and family original animation division, which looks over both series and features for kind of kids and family audiences. And even within that space, as Heather was mentioning, and I think one of the other things that have changed with the streaming and the OTT increase in the space is there's no longer kind of that pressure or that need to target a very specific audience, right? For a linear channel on a specific slot, it's important to be kind of hyper-focused for a specific demographic in that slot, because that's the audience that kind of really will drive ratings and make an impact in a meaningful way. For us, we don't segment our audience on that way. If our audience is enjoying Netflix and is enjoying a show, if it's made for kids and it's an adult watching, awesome. If they love it and they want to watch more and they love the service more because of it, fantastic. And so it allows us to tell within all of those spaces much kind of broader stories that can speak to kind of different audiences, really kind of making the hopefully the strongest, most impactful kind of broadest stories possible. And so I think we've been lucky to be able to kind of as a company to really look at that full range of stories for the full range of audiences and be able to kind of utilize the animation medium to the absolute maximum. Even doing shows like Love, Death, and Robots, an anthology of episodes of all different formats, very much for an adult audience, with studios from all over the world, and incredible talent is quite powerful. And I think part of why that's so important to us is not only because there's an absolute love of animation all over the world, but as a global service, it is such a great global medium. Right, it's easily dubbed over. You can hardly tell what the kind of original language of a show is with kind of good dubs. So it allows creators, filmmakers, studios from any part of the world to tell a story that feels really kind of personal and specific to them, but can also speak to an audience all over the world. It's great that it's fantastic that on Netflix and other platforms we're really seeing that openness and love and excitement for folks to watch live action content in different languages than theirs. Yeah. Outside of the US, it's been very common. It's not a new trend at all. And in the US, we're seeing that happen increasingly as well. But animation has been ahead of the game, I think, in that sense, as a very kind of global medium. So it's one that's for many reasons really exciting for us.
Right. And also it's interesting that I think with Netflix, there's an opportunity for a show which has worked in a market well and potentially can be sampled in other territories and be, I mean, my own experience with my show, Krishtish Balti Boy, which is actually Indian folk tales, and then when you guys chose to subtitle it in Turkish, Polish, Chinese, and Korean, I was like, wow, I mean, this content is now reaching out to markets which potentially we never looked at exploiting, and I think it's opportunities like this that is what makes a platform like Netflix very, very interesting. That there is an openness for people to sample content from literally any corner of the world. And I think that's very, very powerful. As a creator, it's very powerful for me to say that, to find that yes, my content obviously not just is working in India, but there is an audience which is willing to sample my content or my shows. And perhaps they might like it. That obviously, I mean, at a certain level, obviously increases the revenue potential or the licensing and merchandising potential as well. So in a way, I think Netflix has really leveled the game for people. Earlier you needed to have a big distribution company or a big toy manufacturer to back you and all of that to launch property. But today, potentially with the Netflix, I think the reach out to a global audience is much, much easier, and I think that's really empowering at a certain level, But Heather, how do you think this whole, game has changed today when you look at commissioning shows, with the entry of OTT platforms? And again, we talked about a little when we spoke earlier about celebrity content, or established IPs.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting when we did the last shift, right, from Saturday morning to cable. Library was really important. For instance, Cartoon Network was launched on the Hanna-Barbera library, and that's how they could even, do a 24-hour channel. And now it's interesting because you have kind of the new people to the kids space, and let's say that's Apple, that's Netflix, that's streamers like that, and they're commissioning a lot, and they're building their libraries. But how do you get? And I'm sure you have opinions too, or I'm just talking, but this is what I think. But to get and then so they're building. And then you have the established people like Nick, like Cartoon, like Disney, absolutely 100%, that have these very established brands that are their libraries that they can fall back on. Everybody's going to get Disney Plus to get that Disney library. So then you see the newer players into the marketplace, like the Apples, like the Netflixes. I think that in order to compete, they're looking for those brands, those kind of marquee brands that didn't have a home before, and can have a home there. Or who is that, from the producer that brought you blank, now we have this, or, featuring these celebrity voices. So I think it's really upped the competitiveness in that kind of way that it never used to be. I feel much more as I put together my projects. Okay, what is the hook, or what's different here in order to be competitive? So, we talked about how there's faster, it's more serialized, there's more, but then not only that, okay, there is more. So how are you going to stand out? How are you going to set your show up to stand out amongst what used to be 3 networks, but now is, there's a lot of different outlets. And I know we've been talking streaming and OTT a lot, but, there's also all different platforms through apps, and it's just like, if you look at Facebook and Quibi and YouTube and, and some platforms that have come and gone, like Oath, so it's just this new kind of fire hose of different places that you can pitch. And it's great, but once you get your show made and on air, how do you make sure people are coming to it and watching it? Right. And that all needs to be built into the development.
Heather, you mentioned there was some squirrels in that tree behind you. One of them just fell down behind you. It was like a slapstick moment in the middle.
I know there's like this ongoing squirrel thing going on. I'm sorry. I thought it'd be quiet out here. I didn't know it would be the nut job going on over my head.
The animated conversations, right?
Yeah. Perfect.
All right. So, I think the other thing I want to talk to you guys about is, India, we have a rich heritage of storytelling and stories, and we absolutely love telling stories, But a lot of the writers or creators may have never worked on a major international show, or for that matter, any show, So, Adam, how do you work with such first-time creators,
Yeah, I think it's a couple things, and you're absolutely right. I think that's what's so exciting about working within the market in India. I think obviously in entertainment in general, but specifically within animation, is incredibly rich storytelling culture, incredibly wealth of like stories and folklore and mythology, but even just personal stories, right? Like the diversity of life across India is so incredibly rich, and there's so many folks that you talk to that have such interesting kind of unique backgrounds and stories and experiences that are both kind of unique and personal, but so interesting and can deeply kind of connect to audiences all around the world. And so I think you're absolutely right that it's such a great kind of epicenter for those stories to kind of really emerge for global audiences. And so there's also a great wealth of the independent studio ecosystem that exists within India. Of course, there's studios that have been working on international co-productions for many years. There are studios that, such as yours, Munjal, that have been really kind of focusing on the Indian market and telling those stories. And there's a really great opportunity for kind of, I think, partnership between young storytellers, young writers, with the studios such as yours, to be able to kind of help bring that to life. And we're always, if there's a kind of a concept and a storyteller that we're really kind of connecting to in a deep way, we're always happy to kind of get involved and partner at an early stage. But we do also think that partnership with a studio within India, using India as an example, is also quite important, because that infrastructure and that support system on a regular basis, the group of folks, kind of that creative trust to be able to kind of share ideas, is really important, especially for kind of a new and evolving creator and storyteller. So I think it comes down to really authenticity in the stories that are being told, right? I think there's definitely less so now, but initially when we went out to market and talked about really kind of wanting global stories, universal stories, there's an inclination to tell a story that's not necessarily yours, that feels a little bit generic, that's similar to other things that you're seeing on the channels and the streaming services. But really, for us, what we meant is a story that is deeply personal, that is unique, that is specific to the storyteller that's telling it, but it has those universal themes that audiences around the world can kind of connect to and enter through their own kind of mediums and through their own channels. So I think the first step is really kind of looking looking kind of deeply and identifying what the core of the story that you want to tell is. And then I think it's about those kind of creative partnerships to help kind of structure that into something that can eventually become kind of a series or a feature idea. And a lot of my conversations that I've been having with the studios in India, because of kind of this demand of great stories of this nature, is kind of really going deeper into that kind of community of storytellers and finding folks and kind of mentoring them and supporting them in cool, exciting ways.
Can I just add to that, Munjal, really quick? Because when I do it, is that all right?
Yeah, please.
Right, yeah, because Aaron touched on something quite interesting there. Because when I started working in India, I mean, your project, Munjal, was one of the first ones that we worked on. But back then, we were working on a lot of mythological sort of based stuff that really was leaning fully into very, very hyper-local kind of stuff. Now, over the past few years, like at the moment, actually, as Aaron said, there's a lot of really interesting, smaller independent studios that I've been working with. One in particular, just south of Kerala, and they're doing this incredible kind of Preston Blair, sort of Chuck Jones kind of Hollywood slapstick sort of stuff, but they're also leaning into very local, it's informed by very local sort of storytelling as well. So you've got the confluence of this very sort of local thing with this sort of golden age of Hollywood kind of execution, which is like super interesting. And that's something that's just evolved over the last, in terms of this kid space I've been working in, it's something that you see a lot more of now anyway. So, so that's really been quite a sort of interesting development. And it's not, I guess that studio I'm working with was saying that, there's not just Bollywood there's all these other Bollywoods, right? There's Sandalwood. That's where this studio is. They're in Sandalwood, which is like, you know what I'm talking about, Munjal? It's like south of Kerala. I mean, these guys are incredible. So if anything, they've sort of outstripped the kind of slapstick that we used to go to Burbank to kind of find talent that could do that. And it's, and leaning into this Indian thing, which is, it's a really, really interesting kind of hybrid model that is local, but fully exportable, not a lot of dialogue. I think this is going to work, really well internationally. So, yeah. So it's.
I had a follow-up question to what you're saying. One of the other things is, what about, doing development deals, which is that let's look at a few ideas, let's develop them forward, and then see what emerges out of that. Is that something that Netflix is open to, or is that something that you guys are considering right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a number of projects really around the world that we develop at early stages. The hope is that majority of the projects that we're developing kind of move forward and have the ability and the right structure and the support to move forward. So I think we're very conscious of not developing for the sake of developing, but really kind of develop to greenlight. And of course, sometimes there's bumps in the road. There's a lot of learnings that happen, which is just natural in the development process. And we don't want to shy away from projects that seem to have kind of challenges up front, because there's a lot of that with, again, the right support and the right vision, we can kind of help unpack. So development is something that is a very important part of the process, and particularly important when betting on kind of new and emerging talent. And of course, again, I think looking at a place like India, we definitely want to lean into that great ecosystem of independent studios to help support a lot of that development and work with a lot of that talent, because we don't want to develop in a sense where you have individuals who don't have a lot of kind of experience and don't have a lot of direction, that are felt a little bit kind of alone in that process. But rather have that right guidance and that right support and that right level of partnership and mentorship through that development process to hopefully get their projects to the other side of it. But I think in short, absolutely, we have been developing a number of projects around the world and will continue to do so.
Okay. That's interesting, I mean, this is just sharing from personal experience. I mean, I've worked very closely with Heather and Silas, and through that early stage when, with Silas, I worked, I think probably over 10 years back, and I think we benefited greatly from that exposure coming from a big network, understanding the audience across the globe, And I think the other thing also that really helped is like when we did Kulvira, I think one of the things that Cartoon Network brought to the table is access to really top-notch talent. Like we had guys like Mark Hamill, who did the voicing for one of our shorts, and Paulson, Rob Paulson, Charlie Adler. I mean, it was a fascinating experience for us to work with some of these guys. I mean, super talented. And I think that's the difference that where for sometimes having a good EP on board, and who knows what kind of talent to bring to the table, that's the strength that bringing. I mean, Heather in that sense has been very, very phenomenal. I mean, I've had such a pleasure working with her on one of the IPs right now that we've been working very closely on, and I think we've been very fortunate that with her coming on board, it's been greenlit, it's on, and I think I could see the difference when she came on board, what she brought to the table, that many years of experience. And Heather, coming to you, you've obviously worked with many studios across the world, with different creators. Tell us a little bit about that, and what do you think is the opportunity for Indian creators?
Well, everybody's looking for what's new, what's different. It's like something you've seen before, a lot like what Silas was just talking about. It's these, diamonds in the rough that have taken something we've kind of seen before, but they've innately wrapped it in their own thing, their own view of the world, or something that we would have never thought about in the United States. So I spend a lot of time traveling to different places and just meeting creators and seeing what they're working on, looking for those people that can bring something back to the US that is tinged in where they come from, what they've brought. That's something that's really different and fresh and unusual, and but still, like Aaron was saying, is fused with that global a kid is a kid is a kid, right? Every kid is hurt. Doesn't matter where you are. Every kid is hurt when they're not the first one picked to get in the game. You know, it's like, so even though it has this wrapping of something very unusual, it's very based in the heart and things that every kid's going to understand. So I think that those are the shows that you're looking for. So that when you bring them out and, you know, start pitching, people are like, oh, I've never seen that before. Oh, that's really interesting. Oh, but I totally get these characters and they're lovely. And it looks different. I haven't seen this before. Like, so, and I think that that's a huge, huge opportunity for creators in India, that there's a lot we haven't seen, or a lot of points of view. Like, you know, the project that Silas is talking about, you're like, that sounds really interesting. I'd love to see what Looney Tunes looks like, you know, through Kerala. So I think, you know, it is playing into, and we're lucky that we live in this time that we are able to show very diverse projects and that people are looking for that kind of stuff to break through. And so what is that? What looks different? What feels different? But is still very grounded in global kid emotions that kids everywhere experience.
Thanks, Heather. Silas, you know, you've worked across APAC. You know, I just want to ask you this, you know, that when you look at different countries, particularly in APAC, you know, do you feel that certain countries are, in terms of the policy or in terms of promoting original content, are better geared or better structured or provide the right ecosystem? And any particular countries that come to your mind? And you know, I mean, this is more for the policymakers in India, you know, because at FICCI, you know, basically we also work closely with the government and help influence policy. So I would really like.
Did you mean in terms of compliance and those kind of things? Like,
I think just the ecosystem, you know, in terms of grants, in terms of co-production treaties.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that comes into this kind of virtual studio thing that we were going to talk about, because you know, if you've got that, then you can kind of, you can take advantage of a lot of those producer offsets and incentives by, you know, remotely kind of crewing up with people that might need to tick certain boxes in terms of quotas for nationalities and stuff. But Malaysia is amazing in terms of, I mean, a lot of the projects I've worked on have, I mean, those things do make a difference often in terms of where we choose to do certain parts of a project. Malaysia obviously has, you know, the FINAS incentive there. Australia's really good right now. I mean, they've upped the PDV offset to, I think it's 40% now in Queensland and Victoria. So that's pretty amazing. I mean, those things make a huge difference. You know, I mean, we factor those into you know, budgets for series and stuff like that. So
Singapore is also a lot of work there.
Sorry?
Singapore,
yeah. Singapore's good. I mean, you know, it's yeah. So yeah, that definitely makes it definitely influences decisions and stuff. I mean, especially you know, animation is expensive to make, and I mean, it also depends on, you know, look, some of those incentives are really super crowded and more difficult to get, and there's other places where it's, you know, easier for whatever reasons. But yeah, I mean, the answer to that is, like, you know, they absolutely make a difference to where, not just, you know, I mean, the Cartoon Network, we're always looking for you know, at those kind of you know, programs to keep costs down, but yeah, so, you know, that's something that we look at carefully.
All right, we are almost an hour in. I'm just want to open up for questions if we have any.
How does the question part work?
Yep.
Oh, you'll hear people if they've got questions. You'll hear it.
All right. Okay.
Chat.
All right. So we don't have any questions as yet. So let's we have a couple of more minutes. So, in terms of just kind of experimenting also with the format, and one of the cool things I like about some of the stuff that you guys are doing is the whole interactive episode, like on Carmen Sandiego or Captain Underpants or the Bandersnatch. I mean, is that something that you think we're going to see more of?
It's a really interesting area, obviously, especially within the kid space. The characters are not characters on TV. They're their friends, right? They're real. They want to interact with them in as many ways as they can. And so interactive has been an exciting extension. Obviously, we've been leaning into that space across genres, but especially within kids, an exciting extension of the shows and the characters that our audiences really love, to be able to kind of add to that viewing experience. And so one that we continue to feel really excited about, kind of like building out and innovating. And I think as you look at the different levels of interactive programming, it's continued to kind of evolve over time, which is exciting for us. There's a great team dedicated to that.
No, it's a very cool. I think there's something empowering, for a kid to see his favorite character and he's in control of what that character does. I mean, at my age, I find it fascinating. So I'm sure kids will find it too. So, Silas, Japan is, in terms of innovation and tech, and particularly in the animation space, a lot of crazy ideas that come from that place. Anything that you've seen recently, which is kind of out of the box, which you think might be a trend for the future?
Like I said, a lot of really interesting stuff happens here, but there's a lot of kind of guys in grey suits that sort of behind the scenes in these animation companies, pulling the strings and stuff. But yeah, there's a director called, Shinichiro Watanabe, who did Space Dandy and Cowboy Bebop and stuff like that. There's more shows that that's not they don't incorporate a conventional top-down kind of model. It's more like, especially for it's what I was talking about before, especially with regards to the conceptual development and pre-production stage. Space Dandy in particular is super interesting because it's a different director for every episode. Characters it's encouraged. This is a bit of a trend now, but characters are encouraged to go off model in a different way to the way that Adventure Time did that. But it's more, rather than the show dictating the look and feel of what the director does, it's more like the director is dictating that and really invoking his own personal proclivities and stuff into a show. So that is becoming more common, but the guys that made those really groundbreaking shows are doing other very interesting stuff with more of an animated jam kind of model, where again it's more like a horizontal thing where you've got it's not as hierarchical as, because the Japanese production models are usually very hierarchical. It's more like a horizontal thing where you've got people like writers able to work directly with the director, working directly with someone in design and blah, 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 rather than, it being a much more strictly kind of organized production, which, as Heather and Aaron would know, that's, really, really fully enforced in Japanese production, and more so in Korea and stuff like that. But that is leading to some really interesting looking stuff. The other really interesting thing, as I mentioned before, is trying to blend that volumetric thing with, with this very flat, like anime is very much like watching layers sliding over surfaces rather than, traditionally animated fluid kind of, Disney stuff, or Warner Brothers stuff. So there's kind of early attempts at seeing these kind of things, like adding a Z-axis, for example, in slapstick, opens up a whole new kind of bunch of possibilities in terms of comedy and pain, right? Once you've got the Z-axis, you can really sort of mess someone up physically, right? So as opposed to just on a X and a Y axis. So trying to combine these two types of culturally different animation production models is something that we're seeing more of here, which is super, super interesting. And I think you'll see more of that in 2021 and 2022 when some of these shows, come out of production. So that's the interesting thing that's happening here. And it is, very, very different to the way things have happened in the past. It's just beginning. So that's the word in the street. Yeah. There you go.
I just want to, it'll be good for people here when we have a question which is related, is that how does one come and pitch to Netflix? Who are your team? You are obviously in LA now, but what's the team in India? What's the team in Asia? If people want to come and pitch an idea. Netflix.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, across animation, we have execs all over the world, obviously, in Los Angeles and London, Amsterdam, Brazil. We have our anime team based out of Tokyo. And then on the kids and family side, we have Ed Barnier, an executive who's based in Singapore, who is helping oversee our animated series coming throughout all of Asia. And so it's really important for us to be accessible within hopefully just a few time zones at most to talent, both in terms of kind of pitching new shows, but obviously when things start going into production, to have resources and support that's quite close. Obviously, what a market means today and what a festival means today is a little bit different, but it's also quite important for us to be accessible through different markets and through different festivals, to be able to access kind of the next generation of talent and pitches. And it's something that we've been attending digitally for now, whether it's digital Annecy or otherwise. But we hope to kind of continue to attend once things return to some sort of normal. But again, we have deep and hopefully can continue to build our relationships with the independent studio community within India and otherwise. And we think that that's, folks with ideas, we always kind of encourage them to seek partnerships there. And whether, Munjal, you and I speak quite often. I speak quite often with many of the other kind of studio heads. And as you guys kind of see interesting projects that you're interested in developing with maybe creators that you haven't worked with before under your roof, that's always a really great opportunity to then come to us, because of course, we have a shorthand with you guys and many of the other studios that we're working with that can help really kind of expedite and support that process. Otherwise, as you can imagine, it is a lot of pitches coming in, which is always great, but it really allows us to kind of focus how we kind of intake a lot of those pitches.
Okay, awesome. So our time is up, and thank you so much. You guys have been absolutely amazing, and a personal vote of thanks to all of you for taking the time out today. And thanks again, and I hope you guys had fun doing this. I definitely had fun with you guys. Yep. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
See you guys later.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. With that, we come to the end of day 4 of the eFrames 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, see you tomorrow for the final day of eFrames 2020.